Part 1. The station floated at the exact center of nothing. It sat in a place where no stars burned close enough to warm its metal skin, where no planets spun nearby, where even light seemed tired by the time it arrived. The collective of chroniclers had chosen this location 12 billion cycles ago for exactly that reason. Neutrality required emptiness. Measurement required calm. Sen had served as a lead assessor for 600 cycles. In that time, he had measured the fears of over 2,000 species. He had the terror of beings made of gas who feared condensation. He had recorded the nightmares of creatures who lived in the hearts of stars and dreaded the cold. He had documented species who feared sound, species who feared silence, species who feared the color blue for reasons their own psychologists could not explain. Nothing surprised him anymore. Fear was universal, predictable, and ultimately boring in its repetition. Every species feared death. Every species feared pain. Every species feared the unknown. The details changed, but the pattern remained constant. When the notification arrived that a new species had achieved faster-than-light travel and requested admission to galactic society, Sen treated it as routine. The species called themselves humans. They came from a small rocky world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in an unremarkable arm of an unremarkable galaxy. Their biology was carbon-based, water-dependent, and oxygen-breathing. Standard, predictable, boring. He assembled his assessment team with the same efficiency he always did. 3 junior chroniclers would handle the equipment. 2 senior analysts would process the data. Sen himself would conduct the primary interviews and oversee the final calculations. The entire process would take perhaps 40 standard cycles. Then humans would receive their entry in the Universal Fear Index, and Sen would move on to the next species, and the next, until his crystalline form finally degraded beyond function. The assessment delegation departed and made the journey to human space. They arrived at a station the humans called Geneva Orbital, a spinning wheel of metal and glass that hung above there. Sen looked down at the planet through a viewing port and saw blue oceans, green continents, and white clouds. It looked peaceful. It looked safe. He expected the assessment would confirm a species of moderate fears, probably centered on environmental concerns and social rejection, as was common for communal carbon-based life. The first interview subject was a human female named Dr. Sarah. She worked and had volunteered for the assessment process. She sat across from Sen in a small room with white walls and bright lights, and she smiled at him with an expression that showed her teeth. Sen had learned that humans showing teeth did not indicate aggression. This was one of the few preliminary notes in his briefing file. He activated the fear measurement array and began the standard protocol. "Please state your name and position for the record," he said. "Dr. Sarah, Chief for the United Earth Research Initiative." "Thank you. I will now ask you a series of questions. Please answer honestly. The equipment will detect deception, so there is no benefit to false responses." Doctor nodded, understood. Sen consulted his list. "What do you fear most?" The human woman paused. She looked at the ceiling, then at the wall, then back at Sen. "That's a big question. I fear a lot of things." "Please be specific." "Well, I fear failure. I fear disappointing the people who depend on me. I fear making a mistake that costs lives. I fear dying before I finish my work. I fear dying after I finish my work and finding out it didn't matter. I fear the dark sometimes when I'm alone. I fear deep water. I fear heights. I fear small spaces. I fear large spaces. I fear being forgotten. I fear being remembered for the wrong reasons. I fear." "Please stop," Sen said. The equipment was malfunctioning. It had to be. The readings showed fear responses activating across multiple categories simultaneously, spiking to levels he had never seen in 600 cycles of assessment. The human woman was not even breathing hard. She sat calmly in her chair, still smiling, while the instruments insisted she was experiencing terror equivalent to a warrior facing a planetary extinction event. Is something wrong? Doctor asked. Sen recalibrated the array. Please continue. I fear insects. Some of them, not all of them. I fear diseases I can't see. I fear accidents I can't prevent. I fear the universe being empty and I fear the universe being full. I fear. That is sufficient. He ran the calibration again. The numbers remained impossible. This single human, sitting peacefully in a well-lit room on a safe station, was registering fear levels that should have left her unable to function. She should have been curled in a corner, shaking, weeping, begging for the terror to stop. Instead, she checked her watch and asked if they would be done soon because she had a meeting. Sen dismissed her and called for the next subject. The next subject was a human male named James. He worked as an engineer. His fear readings were even higher than doctors. He listed fears of machinery failure, fears of structural collapse, fears of vacuum exposure, fears of radiation, fears of fire, fears of drowning, fears of crushing, fears of falling, fears of being trapped, fears of being unable to save his colleagues. He recited this list while eating a snack and occasionally checking messages on a small personal device. The third subject was worse. The fourth subject was worse than that. By the 10th subject, Sen had stopped believing the equipment was malfunctioning and started believing something far more disturbing. The equipment was working perfectly. Humans were simply wrong. He called for a break and retreated to his temporary quarters. He spent 4 hours reviewing the data, cross-referencing it with 12 billion cycles of records, searching for any species that had shown similar patterns. He found nothing. The closest match was the prime, a species that had gone extinct 4 billion cycles ago after their own fear responses drove them to collective suicide. They had registered at 60% of the levels he was seeing from humans. Sen contacted and requested guidance. The response came quickly. Senior chronicler Meth Vila instructed him to continue the assessment and gather more data. The collective would review his findings upon his return. He continued. He assessed humans from every region of their planet, every profession, every age group, every background. The results remained consistent. Every human registered fear levels that should have been incompatible with functional existence, and yet they functioned. They more than functioned. They had built cities and nations and empires. They had crossed oceans that terrified them, climbed mountains that terrified them, built machines that terrified them to carry them into the sky and then into space. During the final interview, Sen asked a human child what she feared. The girl was 8 years old. She listed monsters under her bed, the dark hallway at night, spiders being lost, her parents dying, the sun exploding, ghosts, aliens, being alone forever, and math tests. She then asked Sen if he wanted to see the drawing she had made of a spider, because she was trying to be brave by drawing the things that scared her. He looked at the drawing. It was crude but clearly recognizable as a spider. She had drawn it with 8 legs and many eyes and labeled it Mr. Scary. "Why did you draw this?" he asked. "Because Mom says if you look at scary things enough, they stop being so scary." "Does it work?" The girl considered the question seriously. "Sort of. I still don't like spiders, but I'm not as scared of them as I used to be. Now I can look at them. Before I couldn't even look at them." Sen saved the drawing to his files. He did not know why. It seemed important somehow, though he could not articulate how. He completed the assessment and departed human space. During the journey back he reviewed his data 17 times. He rechecked his calculations. His methodology. Everything was correct. Everything was impossible. When he finally arrived at the station and presented his findings to the collective, the ancient crystalline matrices that stored the universal fear index hummed with activity for the first time in 3 billion cycles. Every assessor in the collective was summoned to review the human data. "There must be an error," senior chronicler Methvila said. "I checked for errors," Sen replied. "I found none." "Then your equipment was sabotaged." "It was not." Then the humans deceived you somehow. The equipment detected no deception. The collective debated for 7 cycles. They argued about methodology. They questioned Sen's competence. They demanded he return to human space and conduct the assessment again with different equipment. He did. The results were identical. The humans were the most terrified species ever measured, and they had somehow built a civilization that spanned their solar system and now reached toward the stars. The universal fear index could not explain it. The collective could not explain it. For the first time in 12 billion cycles, the chroniclers faced a mystery they did not know how to solve. Part 2. The investigation formally began 17 cycles after Sen returned from his second assessment, with results identical to his first. The collective of chroniclers did not undertake investigations lightly. In 12 billion cycles, they had only found it necessary 7 times. The last investigation had occurred 4 billion cycles ago, when the prime readings had suggested that fear could reach lethal thresholds. That investigation had concluded with the species' extinction and a new category in the index for self-destructive terror. The humans should have belonged in that category. By every measurement, every calculation, every model, they should have destroyed themselves long ago. Their fear levels exceeded the prime by nearly 40%. They should have been paralyzed, broken, unable to function as individuals, let alone as a society. Instead, they had sent 17 representatives to participate in the investigation. They arrived on their own ship, which they had designed and built themselves, traveling through the void that they freely admitted terrified them. Sen watched them disembark and found himself unable to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew. The lead human representative was a man named. He was tall for his species, with dark skin and gray hair and a smile that showed his teeth. He shook Sen's hand, which was a human greeting ritual that involved physical contact. Sen's crystalline form was not designed for such contact, but he had grown a temporary appendage specifically for this purpose. The humans seemed to appreciate the effort. "Thank you for having us," said. "I understand we've caused quite a stir." "You have broken our index," Sen replied. "I hope that's a good thing." "We do not yet know." The investigation team consisted of 37 chroniclers, each specialized in a different aspect of fear assessment. They divided the 17 humans among them and began their work. They scanned human brains while exposing them to frightening stimuli. They measured hormone levels during stress responses. They physiological reactions to threats. They interviewed, tested, observed, and recorded. The young chronicler named Save was assigned to observe humans during what they called leisure time. This was apparently a period when humans were not working and could do whatever they wished. Save expected them to seek calm and safety, as all other species did during rest periods. Instead, she watched them do things that made no sense at all. One human, a woman named, spent her leisure time watching recordings on a screen. Save monitored her biometrics during this activity and was alarmed to see fear responses spiking repeatedly. She rushed to check on the human, certain something was wrong. "Are you in distress?" she asked. Looked up from her screen. "What? No, I'm fine." "Your fear responses are elevated." Oh, laughed, showing teeth. "Yeah, I'm watching a horror movie." "A horror movie? It's a story designed to scare you. This one's about a monster that hunts people in a space station." Save processed this information. "You are deliberately exposing yourself to frightening stimuli during your rest period." "Yeah, it's fun." "Fun? Entertaining, enjoyable." Save's crystalline form flickered with confusion. "You find fear enjoyable?" Considered the question. "Sometimes. Not real fear like actually being in danger, but pretend fear, controlled fear that can be exciting. It gets your heart pumping, makes you feel alive." "This is common among humans." "Very common. Horror movies, haunted houses, scary stories around campfires. We've been doing it forever. Kids especially love being scared. There's a whole holiday where we dress up as monsters and try to frighten each other. Save filed this information and continued her observations. She watched another human, a young man named, engage in an activity that involved jumping out of a spacecraft with only a thin fabric device to slow his fall. His fear readings during this activity were astronomical. When he landed safely, he was laughing and immediately asked if he could do it again. She watched humans consume chemicals that elevated their heart rate and made them jittery, chemicals they called caffeine, and which they ingested multiple times daily. She watched them engage in physical contests that risked injury. She watched them climb to high places for no reason except to see the view. She watched them approach wild animals despite knowing those animals could harm them. Every observation contradicted everything she understood about fear and survival. Fear was supposed to prevent dangerous behavior. That was its evolutionary purpose across all known species. Organisms that feared fire did not touch fire. Organisms that feared heights avoided heights. Organisms that feared predators hid from predators. Humans feared all these things intensely, and then they did them anyway. She began interviewing individual humans about this pattern. Her questions were simple and direct. "You fear heights," she said to a human named Santos. "Yes," he agreed. "And yet you regularly climb mountains." "Yes." "Why?" "Thought about it. Because climbing mountains is amazing. The fear is part of what makes it amazing. When you're up there and you're terrified and you keep going anyway, you feel like you can do anything, like nothing can stop you. The fear motivates you. In a way, it's like fuel. The harder my heart pounds, the more alive I feel." Save interviewed more humans. They all said similar things in different ways. Fear made them feel alive. Fear made them feel powerful. Fear proved they were doing something meaningful. A thing that was not frightening was not worth doing. She compiled her findings and presented them to the investigation team. The senior chroniclers received her report with skepticism. They had spent billions of cycles documenting fear as a negative value, a weakness to be measured and minimized. The idea that any species might view it differently seemed like a misunderstanding on Save's part. But the evidence was undeniable. Humans did not suppress fear or avoid it or pretend it did not exist. They sought it out. They cultivated it. They built entire industries around creating and experiencing artificial fear, and somehow, impossibly, they were stronger for it. Save began developing a theory. She spent cycles reviewing human evolutionary history, studying the records they had brought with them. Their species had developed on a world filled with predators, natural disasters, and constant competition for resources. The humans who survived were not the ones who felt the least fear. They were the ones who could act despite feeling the most fear. Their ancestors had faced saber-toothed cats with nothing but sharpened sticks. They had crossed frozen wastelands and burning deserts. They had built boats and sailed across waters so vast they could not see the other side. At every stage, the ones who survived were not the fearless. They were the terrified ones who moved forward anyway. Over millions of cycles, this pattern had shaped human neurology in ways no other species had experienced. Their brains had developed to treat fear not as a stop signal but as a resource signal. Fear flooded their systems with adrenaline, which increased strength, sharpened senses, and accelerated thought. Other species fought against this response. Humans had learned to ride it like a wave. She presented her theory to the full collective. The ancient crystalline matrices hummed as they processed her proposal. For a long moment, silence filled the great chamber at the heart of. Then senior chronicler Methvila spoke. "You are suggesting that our entire understanding of fear is incomplete." "Yes," Save said. "You are suggesting that fear is not inherently a weakness." "Yes." "You are suggesting that it can be a source of strength." "In humans, yes. Perhaps in others as well if they learn to process it differently." The collective debated for 3 cycles. They reviewed every piece of evidence. They interviewed the human representatives again and again. They ran simulations and calculations and projections. When they finished, the result was unprecedented. For the first time in 12 billion cycles, the Universal Fear Index would be expanded. A new metric would be added, one that measured not just how much fear a species experienced, but what they did with that fear. They called it the transformation coefficient. And humans had proven it was possible. Part 3. The Galactic Symposium convened once every 1,000 cycles on a rotating station that traveled between the major powers of known space. It was the largest gathering of species in existence, a place where civilizations that had never shared a star system stood in the same halls and attempted to understand one another. For many species, it was the only time they ever saw beings different from themselves. This cycle, the symposium had been scheduled to discuss trade routes and territorial boundaries, the usual boring matters that kept the peace between ancient empires. But the collective of chroniclers had requested an additional session, an unprecedented break from tradition. The index had been amended. A new category had been added for the first time in 4 billion cycles, and the species responsible would be formally recognized before the entire galaxy. Ambassador Wei had been selected to represent humanity at this session. She was small by human standards, with black hair going gray at the temples and eyes that seemed to notice everything. She had spent her career negotiating with beings who viewed her species as primitive newcomers, too young and too strange to be taken seriously. She was used to condescension. She had learned to turn it into an advantage. The great hall of the symposium could hold representatives from 10,000 species. Today it was nearly full. Word had spread about the index amendment. Word had spread about humanity's impossible fear readings. Word had spread about the transformation coefficient. Every species with the means to send a delegation had done so. Senior chronicler Methvila stood at the central podium, her crystalline form catching the light from 100 different suns that shone through the transparent ceiling. Behind her, a massive display showed the Universal Fear Index, its 12 billion cycles of data compressed into visual patterns that even species without shared mathematics could understand. The Universal Fear Index has served galactic civilization for 12 billion cycles, Methvila began. It has the fears of every spacefaring species. It has helped us understand one another. It has prevented wars. It has built peace. And until recently, we believed it was complete. She gestured, and the display changed to show human data. Gasps and murmurs spread through the hall. Even in visual form, the readings were striking. Every fear category showed bars extending far beyond the normal range. If the display had not been labeled, most observers would have assumed they were looking at a species on the verge of extinction from psychological collapse. The species called humanity registers the highest fear levels ever recorded, Methvila continued. By every previous metric, they should be unable to function. Their terror should have destroyed them long ago. Instead, they have built a civilization capable of reaching the stars. She paused to let this sink in. After extensive investigation, the collective has determined that our understanding of fear was fundamentally incomplete. We measured fear as a negative value, a burden that species carried and struggled against. We did not consider that fear might be used differently. We did not consider that it might become fuel. The display changed again, showing the new metric. The transformation coefficient appeared as a golden line that cut across the traditional fear categories, measuring something that had never been measured before. How much of that fear became action? How much of that terror became strength? Humanity has proven that fear is not the enemy of courage. Fear is the raw material from which courage is built. The more terror they experience, the more power they have available to transform. They do not succeed despite their fear. They succeed because of it. Methvila turned to face Ambassador Wei. We invite the human representative to address the symposium. Wei rose from her seat and walked to the podium. She was aware of thousands of eyes watching her, sensors and receptors and organs of perception she could not even identify. She was aware that many of those watching had lived for millions of cycles and regarded her species as children barely capable of walking. She was aware that what she said here would shape how the galaxy viewed humanity for generations. She was also aware that her heart was pounding, her palms were sweating, and a voice in the back of her mind was screaming that she was not qualified for this moment. Good, she thought, use it. I'm not going to pretend that humans are special, she began. Her voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her. We are not inherently braver than other species. We are not stronger or smarter or more determined. We simply experience fear differently, and we have learned to work with that difference rather than against it. She looked out at the assembled representatives. Every human who has ever done something impossible has done it while afraid. The first human to make fire was afraid of fire. The first human to cross the ocean was terrified of the water. The first human to leave our planet was scared of the void in ways I cannot adequately describe. They did not wait until the fear went away. They learned that the fear never goes away, and they acted anyway. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I understand this may seem like a weakness to some of you. Species that have evolved beyond fear might view us as primitive, underdeveloped, carrying an unnecessary burden. But I would ask you to consider what we have built while carrying that burden. Consider that every human accomplishment has been achieved not in the absence of terror, but in its presence. Consider what that says about what we are capable of. The hall was silent. Wei continued. The collective has called this the transformation coefficient. They measure how much of our fear we convert into action. But I think there is a simpler way to understand it. Fear is energy. It fills your body with strength you did not know you had. It sharpens your mind to a point. It makes everything more vivid and more present and more real. Most species treat this energy as poison to be expelled. Humans treat it as fuel to be burned. She smiled, showing teeth. We are very good at burning fuel. When she finished speaking, the silence continued for a long moment. Then slowly, the representatives began to react. The massive armored beings who had bred fear out of their warrior castes 10 million cycles ago leaned together in urgent conference. The shade dwellers, entities of pure thought who had pursued perfect tranquility for longer than Earth had existed, flickered with new patterns of consideration. The Axiom Collective, silicon minds who had excised all emotion from their processing cores, began running simulations they had never thought to run before. The questions came quickly after that. How did humans train themselves to act despite fear? Could other species learn this technique? Was the transformation coefficient something that could be improved, or was it fixed at birth? The collective had prepared for some of these questions, but not all. Wei answered what she could and admitted ignorance when she could not. In the weeks that followed, humanity received more requests for cultural exchange than they had in their entire history of interstellar contact. Species wanted to study human children at play, to understand how they learned to face their fears. They wanted to observe human rituals and entertainment and training programs. They wanted to know how a species so terrified of everything had found the courage to reach for the stars. Wei returned to Earth 3 cycles later, exhausted but satisfied. She had done what she could. The rest would be up to humanity as a whole. The effects rippled outward for generations. They began experimental programs to reintroduce controlled fear responses to their warriors. The Shade Dwellers started studying human horror media, trying to understand the appeal of artificial terror. The Axiom Collective ran trillions of simulations on the value of emotional processing and began quietly reinstalling capacity for fear in selected units. Some species found that they could not replicate human results. Their neurologies were too different, too far evolved along other paths, but many discovered that they had been suppressing something that might have made them stronger. Fear had always been there, waiting to be used. They had simply never thought to try. The Universal Fear Index continued to measure, and as it had for 12 billion cycles. But now it measured something new as well. It tracked not just what species feared, but what they built from that fear. And in the records of humanity's entry stood as proof of what was possible. The notation at the end of their file was studied by scholars across the galaxy. The first species to prove that the thing which should destroy them is instead the source of their strength. Fear had never been the enemy. It had always been waiting for someone brave enough to use it. Humanity had simply been terrified enough to try.